So let's talk a little bit about the safety and science of connection. What makes us feel safe in connection with another human being?
Well, for me, that would really look at our attachments. You know, how do we come through childhood? What is it? Why do we even need childhood, for example? You know, why weren't we just born adults? You know, why do we have to go through infancy and toddlerhood and then early childhood? Because the role of those years is about attachment. What do I mean by attachment? Attachment is the process. It's an organized process. It's an organized process of creating an internal self-esteem model that allows me to connect to people. And that model comes from the availability of another human being to be in relationship with me, to help me understand what it means to belong, what it means to be centered, what it means to have value, what it means to be who I am. So when in this case, I'm going to call that other person a mother, okay? So when this infant comes out and they have a mother who is there holding, feeding, doing whatever, 100% preoccupied and attuned with the infant internalizes, I'm safe, I have value, somebody always is going to be there for me. It's essential as the very first building block of good psychological and physical well-being. And so now as that child comes out of the arms and goes to the lap, is sitting up, the child is still scoping their life for that message. Who do I belong to? Is it safe? And do I have value? So that when that mother, or now a grandmother or a father or whoever reinforces that, the child comes out of childhood with what we call a secure attached style.
And so if someone does not have the opportunity to receive a secure attachment style, because this is the reality of many,
yes,
what might that look like?
So there are those kids whose parents don't have the luxury of just being preoccupied. They have to go to work. They're single parents, you know, who have 1, 2 jobs, who themselves did not get that, so they don't know how to model that, okay? There might be families where there's lots of chaos. There might be lots of children in this family. There might be a lot of coming and going. They're on a survival basis. There's lots of poverty. So they're so preoccupied with the conditions exterior that the child is not the focus. This baby is not the focus of the unit, if you will. And so the baby cries, signaling I'm hungry, nobody responds. So the baby has to cry 2, 3 times before somebody responds. And when the child is young, they got fed on time, diaper got changed on time, but maybe the bedtime wasn't regulated. And so now this child it grows up a little anxious. They can't trust the environment because sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not there. And so in that ambiguity, inside becomes anxious and avoidant. They're afraid to bond because they don't know. Or the parent comes when they are available to feed, but the parent is exhausted. So the parent comes to the child with irritability, a little bit of frustration, because, oh my gosh, this child is crying again. Didn't I just feel this child an hour ago? So they're holding the child with a nervous energy, an irritated energy. The child feels that instinctively. It now is going to hit the biology, and the child gets irritable. You see little babies being held by the mothers, and they're doing this body thing because they don't feel safe. Right. And if that does not change, that child can come out with what we call an anxious avoidant attachment style, or maybe even an ambivalent attachment style. And then the last group, so there are 4 attachment styles. The last one is the disorganized, and this is mostly children who were simply abandoned from birth. These are parents who had children, and for whatever reason, it could be the parents' own early childhood experiences. The parents are just not available, right? They're not available. Child is given up or taken by the state because of neglect or maltreatment, or child is adopted out, the child is in foster care and is going from home to home to home. But the child, from the time they were small, there was not somebody who said, you are it. You're the best thing ever happened to me, right? And so they come out of this early attachment not recognizing that they belong to anybody. So they have this disorganized, it has no structure. The internal self mechanism has no structure because they were never modeled a structure. So out of childhood comes this individual who, when they look out into the world as an adult, to create that internal structure, they fill it with places, things, activities. Distractions, because they don't have a core sense of who they are, because it was not mapped in early childhood. You see? And so that child could either be highly perfectionistic, filling the inside with externals, or dismissive. They don't trust anybody, they don't care about anything, they have very limited to no boundaries. And so what do those people take in? Ambivalent attachment styles or disorganized? They take in everybody. They're people pleasers. So they are great with you because if you like me, I'm okay. So I'm always mimicking other people because I don't have anything on the inside because it was never given to me. You know, they look like fairly normal people. You know, they look like people. These are people who have jobs, who go, you know, who could be doing very well, or they could be flipped. They could be very self-destructive. They could be into drugs. They could be into violence. They could be into gangs. And the whole thing about people being attached to gangs and violence is, again, there is no organized they never had safety. And so everything is acted out. Everything is externally processed.
It's seeking safety, actually.
Seeking safety from the outside.
Yeah.
And it's very painful to watch.
Yeah, I mean, I really resonate with what you're saying because, you know, being someone who experienced abandonment from my father, I did have a very present mother and other family members. However, I can still see the ways in which I have a people-pleasing tendency in my nervous system. I have had perfectionism. I have had this almost feeling like I need to prove myself in order to be valued. I mean, at the root of it all comes down to this idea of self-worth, right?
Yes,
and
it does.
Our self-worth is really connected to our ability to really know ourselves, to really accept ourselves and love ourselves, and to receive that witnessing, that sense of safety from another, that we are perfectly whole as we are, right? And it's to your point, like I really see within myself the impact of this. Even though I still had this community of support, it's still deeply imprinted my programming.
Yeah, but you know, you can. For me, it's always, when did the community of support show up?
Right.
Okay, because you got to remember that when we're talking about attachment, it happens from the moment of birth, right? So it's from zero. So some kids had a primary caregiver, a parent, whoever, that was available, let's say, for the first 3 months, and then parent had to go away. Okay. But so now the child is in childcare or daycare or wherever, they're being dropped off somewhere. And depending on the family situation, it could be a different person every day. It could be, but wherever they were taken, maybe that place didn't have good bonding. So although the early mother might have been there, the systems that come over right in the most informative years of that child, if they're not equally attuned, they further a sense of abandonment. So yes, you can have other involved family members, but were they attuned to the child? You see? So a child can be 100% lonely and abandoned in a room full of relatives.
I think this is a really powerful point, and when we think about systems and policies that can support attachment and attunement. You know, one is educating, but even something like our maternity leaves, right?
Yes.
You know,
I have big issues with our maternity.
So in the United
leaves.
States
Yes,
and in St. Kitts, it's 3 months, right? And in Canada, we have a year, and we also have paternity leaves.
Yes.
And there's a huge impact to that, right? Like for mother to feel safe enough in terms of her stability that she can be present, I think is a huge factor, right? Going back to your earlier discussion about if I'm holding the child and I'm nervous, which, you know, as a new parent is somewhat inevitable, right? We're not designed to be calm in the face of someone else's dysregulation, right? We're meant to mirror, actually. But can we be aware that we're feeling nervous? Check ourselves, right? Take a few breaths, calm down, and then approach that child from that space of centeredness.
Absolutely.
So that we can really lend essentially our calmness and our nervous system to that child.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and the other thing that you were speaking to that really sat with me was this idea of consistency, right? So we can't necessarily be present all the time. We have jobs, we have realities we have to attend to. And truthfully, a lot of people are dealing with a lot of stress, right? But how do we establish moments of consistency, right? If it's not doesn't necessarily have to be that we're there all the time, but that when we're there, we're present, we're attuned, we're regulated. You know?
And, you know, and that's, you know, I like to, you know, when I'm working with a particular parent group, I often say, listen, when you come home, let's say you pick up the child from childcare, daycare, and you come home, immediately you come in the house is not the time where you want to start doing bonding or anything like that. Let everybody exhale, what I call an emotional timeout. You know, let the kids go to the room and put on house clothes. You know, if they're walking, talking kids, you know, let them take a little shower or play around for a little bit. You go sit, have a cup of whatever it is, just exhale for a moment, okay? Ready yourself for the engagement. You know, for when you, and oftentimes parents are like, no matter what's going on, I have to always do the best right this minute. It's not humanly possible to do that. But when, and you know, we talk about at the end of the day when we have family time, that whole point of family time was that we picked a time when all of us put down the distractions and we come together ready to do us, right? That used to be dinner time. Okay, where we could sit around and get all of the good endorphins. So we're eating, we're laughing, we're talking, we're checking in with each other. Ooh, you know, we're taking all the stress down. But we live now in a time everybody's on shifts, everybody's coming home, they're still on laptops, they're still on iPhones. There is no point when they're dialing down collectively as a family unit the whole body. And so we went out dysregulated, we come back dysregulated, we go to bed dysregulated, and we wake up tired.
Oh, I really like what you're saying here. It's like this idea that we come in, we settle, we attune to the environment first. So that we're all collectively in a space of presence, at least with ourselves. So that we can then come meet each other with a greater quality of presence.
And people tend to think that that's what adults have to do, but kids have to do the same thing too. You have a kid come home from school, if school was not great, you know, you have kids who were bullied, you have kids who didn't do as well, they had kids who had a sense of failure in the classroom. When are they going to just be able to exhale and talk to somebody about what's happening in the body, not just what they're thinking, but what's happening in the body, because they were aroused. You know, what we tend to do is put them, say, you know, what do you want to watch on TV? They go watch another TV show that stimulates them, and then you say, now it's time for bedtime. Say your prayers. The prayers last less than a minute. It's not enough time.
Yeah, I'm really loving what you're saying, especially this idea of allowing them to tune in to what's happening in their body. So something I notice a lot with my children is that, you know, once I pick them up from school, if something has happened, there will almost be this outburst of emotion because now they're in the safety and presence of mom, right?
Yes, of course.
And one of the things I'm really trying to help them understand is, you know, naming what they're feeling, but also where are you feeling this in your body?
Where are you feeling it in the body?
Can you make a connection that sadness is felt here, you know, or anxiety is felt here, you know, and just training them to be more in tune with what their body is communicating to them, because so many of our emotions just fly under the radar, right? They're totally subconscious sometimes.
And that's why, you know, that bedtime routine for kids, and when I say for children, I'm talking from 0 to 18. Be very straight, I'm talking 0 to 18.
Okay.
Right? They need to have a downtime in every 24-hour period. Should be at least 2, right? So bedtime is not get up and eat, brush your teeth, and go to bed. It's a process time. Before we get to eat, you know, after we eat, put down the device, whatever. It's quiet time. Read something, but put that down and just let your body just relax. And then you're into sleep. You get up the next morning. Now you have a rhythm. And it's in that rhythm every day. And this is what I want parents to understand. The rhythm has to be the same every day. Yes, we have exceptions to the rule. If you travel, you're on holiday, whatever. But there has to be a consistent to the rhythm.
Because it establishes safety in the nervous system.
In the nervous system.
Yeah, I can expect that there's going to be this time where I can come down, be present, slow things down, and just be with myself.
Right.
Yeah.
What happens to the kids who have neurodevelopmental challenges, autism, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder? Those kids biologically are wired in such a way that their regulatory systems don't function normally. So the parents have to be very intentional about atmospheric regulation.
So I'm smiling because my son has sensory processing disorder.
Yes.
And this was probably one of the biggest learning experiences of my life. One of the greatest gifts I feel that I've ever received. I mean, certainly him. But this awareness that we are wired differently. Right? Yes. And he's under-responsive to the proprioceptive sense and also vestibular sense. And so he ended up being, you know, very clumsy, like knocking over a cup 1,000,000 times a day, or really bumping into people and these types of things. And initially we kept saying, pay attention, as if that was going to do anything. And it wasn't until, you know, we brought him in to occupational therapy and we started to understand about sensory processing and how unique this is for each of us, and how if he was not receiving enough proprioceptive input, that it put him in this hyperactivity, hyperarousal space. And so actually bedtime routine specifically was very challenging for us, because the water in the tactile response would actually activate him. So bedtime was like a 4-hour, you know, challenge. But to understand how he was uniquely wired so that we could attend to that and understand how to give him what he needs, which he was actually self-correcting anyways, but we didn't understand it. So he was always the kid lifting the heaviest rock, you know, wanting to jump for hours. You know, he was self-correcting by giving himself this proprioceptive input that we didn't truly understand, you know. And it was such a gift to me, because it made me understand that we all perceive the world in a different way.
But what good knowledge and experience for you now to have to pass on to other parents. You know, we're not in this just for ourselves, right?
Absolutely.
We're in here to be models of hope for other parents who are having similar challenges, who don't understand what that is about. I would even add kids who are spanked right before bedtime. If a child is acting up, they're a little bit rowdy, they're not settling, and you spank the child right when you're supposed to be bringing them down, you have simply, by that slap, reactivated the fight-flight syndrome in the nervous system. Shot of cortisol or adrenaline goes right back into the brain. So instead of settling, the body is now re-energized. So hitting any child close to bedtime is just bad business. Hitting a child is bad, but you know, okay. But what I'm saying is how we tone the environment before we're bringing the child down into sleep involves every touch, tone of voice. You know, if you say, "Didn't I tell you to go to bed?" You're not doing anything for that brain.
You know, I really love this because one of the most interesting things I learned about the nervous system is that we tune into the tone of the voice before we tune into the words actually being said.
Always.
And so we're always seeking these signals of danger, unfamiliarity, and safety and familiarity. Yes. And so when we talk about hitting, I think this is a really relevant topic. Yes. Because it still happens, and it happens because generations after generations have done it. And so it becomes almost, well, I experienced it and therefore it's normal. Mm-hmm. However, I think a message I'd really love for people to understand is that when a child is hit, then they are associating that caregiver with lack of safety, right? Lack of safety to express, to be, to learn even. And we're ruling through punishment instead of love and connection. And the real growth happens in the safety of connection.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. Definitely. It is, I like to talk about discipline. Yeah. Discipline is a process of teaching and modeling. And if you discipline well, you seldom have to punish.
Yeah, and the modeling piece is critical, right? Yes. Because the nervous system of the child, when we think about co-regulation, it's all this mirroring, right? So they're learning by our mannerisms, our way that we're carrying, even our body posture, for example, and our sense of calmness or nervousness, right? Yes.
And if we go back a little bit to our attachment styles, these models that we're talking about, that children are taking into adulthood, you got to remember too that lots of our parents have their own early childhood experiences. They come from traumas, We might have parents out there who experience sexual abuse, molestation, violence, domestic violence. We might have parents who come from substance-affected families, where their own parents were not at their best. We have parents who became parents because of rape situations, right? And so they come into this relationship with this child dysregulated themselves with deficits of their own. And we can't fault them, right? And so you have a parent who has a disorganized attachment style. It's not that they're trying to damage the child. They don't know because they don't have it on their own inside. So how do we help those parents come right by the child? And I think for me, this is where the village for the child comes in. And this is where also we recognize that resilience is something that children can use to repair the damage that's been done, unintentional or intentionally, by parents. And resilience is that capacity to thrive by being able to rebirth oneself. Okay? And children have a natural capacity to survive even the worst things, right? And if a child can meet an adult who can bring out this resilient power in them, sometimes that's a teacher, sometimes that's an elder in the community. I think a lot about how Native Americans use elders in their community. Back in African tribes, we think about the community raised the child. We think about how mothers carried around children strapped to their saddle, swath to the body up until they were 2 or 3 years old. Or they handed them off to an auntie in the village or another grandma in the village. This idea that children can have reparative experiences by bonding to other people when parents are not available is power. And so a parent need not think, oh my gosh, I've screwed up my child, there is no hope for this family. I said, yes, there's hope. If you don't think you can do it, attach your child to somebody that you think is doing the model you'd like your child to have. Pick the village for your child, and things can change. And that's the power of the divine. I think the divine has given us communities and options, even when we as parents feel our own sense of inadequacy. And I think that that's a beautiful message of hope for all our children and all of our families.
I love that so much. Yeah, I think it can be really empowering for us as
Yes.
parents to recognize that we don't actually have to do it all alone, and that there is support in almost releasing control, that this
Yes.
self-inflicted pressure that you have to be perfect
Yes.
all the time when you're present, and that you can actually rely on perhaps other family members
Yes.
or friends
Yes.
or teachers.
But I think the important thing is that parents first need to understand what's the difference in the attachment styles,
Yes.
and making sure that you select people in the life of your child who have a style or a model of discipline and wholeness that you really want for your child. It's not everybody in your family who's going to do that. It might be a total stranger, actually.
Yes, yes.
Right? But parents have to be intentional. And I have been doing some parenting workshops, and I keep saying, parenting is one of the hardest jobs to do because you're never on vacation.
That's truth.
Right? So even when the child is at school, you're still not on vacation. You're not on break. Because when you're away from the child, you still need to be sending energy to the child. You still need to be thinking about what comes next.
Yeah,
You know,
we're
and
always
so
connected to the heart.
always
Right?
connected to the heart, right? And so for single parents, for example, who might not have a parenting partner, this could be challenging work. Their level of exhaustion is legendary, right? So how do we as community members come beside single parents to help them? Single dads, single moms, single grandparents, right? How do we support them? And so we need to make sure that we're all, sharing the language, sharing the knowledge, sharing the practices, sharing the stories, so that that child, those children, those teenagers never get to the place where they don't feel they belong to somebody.
I love your reference to sort of ancient wisdom, right? That we see in Native American culture and African tribes, where we have this respect for the elder, for example, and this wisdom of storytelling and sharing.
Yes.
The ways in which different members of the community can play these roles of imparting safety and wisdom through storytelling.
Yeah. It's important because it's in the narrative, it's in the story that I get a sense that I belong to this family.
Yeah.
And our family, you hear kids, our family, I am, even as old as I am, I still talk about, my family goes way back. Let me tell you about my grandfather. And I can, but and when I think about my grandparents, my body gets excited. Because I have this deep down sense of, this is my people. These are my people. This is my family. This is my kin. This is my clan. This is my tribe. And today in our modern times, too many of our children don't have a sense of history, where they come from, who they belong, and they don't hold it with pride.
And that's so powerful, right? Because we're so deeply connected to our ancestry.
Yes.
I mean, both in our strengths and in
Yes.
our unresolved traumas,
Yes.
right? It's carried in the cells.
Yeah.
There's a memory, even if we're
Yeah.
not necessarily actively engaged
Yes.
or understanding our history,
Yes.
there is a memory in the body, right? So we tend to
Yes.
see patterns repeated over generations, right? Like even addictions,
Yes, definitely.
even sexual abuse. We will
Yes.
often see the pattern
Yeah.
continue.
And so just like you have generational trauma that goes from generation to generation, generational patterns of behavior, the power of the story can be part actually of the healing of the family. See, because if I know that, let's say my family and your family have been at war with each other for generations, right? But what if we now change the narrative of that, and your kids and my kids are brought to the table to have a conversation for peace and healing? We get to stop the trauma now.
For all the generations that follow.
To come.
And it frees almost the energy from the past as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it's the same thing for parents. I can say, I didn't get anything good poured into me. And when you come in to work with me, if you become my client, I'm going to say, so how are we going to change that narrative? Mm-hmm. How are we going to not have that be the story that your child tells? Now, the parent might say, I haven't a clue. I said, okay, now we start the work, but do you want to do the work?
Which is the most important part, right?
Yes.
Is the element of self-agency.
Yes.
The choice to heal has to come
Yes.
from within.
Yes.
Right? So the first thing is to make this choice, to even
Yes.
recognize that there is a need. To heal. So how would you advise that parents come to learn or recognize what their attachment style is from their own upbringing, you know?
Well, the good thing, the good thing about this modern era is technology.
It's true.
You Google attachment styles and bam, it's right there,
Yeah.
right? And even if you're reading stuff and you don't know how it applies to you, talk to somebody who does this work, connect with people who are aware. There are lots of people in all of our communities who have this knowledge about types of attachment styles. So if as a parent, I'm a new parent and I want to know, what's in me and how would where I come from affect how I parent? You look up attachment styles, you look up early childhood experiences and its effect on parenting. What's the role of a parent today? You look these things up, there's lots of wisdom out. Google has good stuff, I have to say, right? But then you can also go into your community and find experts in the community to have a conversation. Or you hire a counselor, a therapist, or a community wellness worker. So there are lots of different ways we can get knowledge. It is there if you want it.
Yeah, and one of the things I like to think about sometimes is, how do I know what patterns exist within me that are unhealthy and unconscious? And I like to think, well, what is life reflecting back to me?
There's that too.
Right? Am I struggling in my relationships?
Yeah,
Am I running from one to the next?
Yeah.
Am I struggling to make ends meet? Like, what are all these patterns, these challenges, these cyclical problems that I'm experiencing reflecting back to me about what's happening internally?
Besides what we can learn from external sources, I like journaling as another thing. Look at what our family did and how did our family members turn out? Well, is that the direction I want for my children? Okay, who has the direction? So you're scoping your environment, you're making notes to self, you're doing some reading of your own, right? You're tracking and you're saying, okay, now, so maybe the family doesn't have a computer to look stuff up online, but you got eyes and ears to watch for patterns in your community. You're making notes to self. Well, when you talk to a child this way, this is the response. So I need to learn how not to use that, how to change the tone of voice. Journal, track it for yourself, and then experiment. Do your own experimentation with yourself, right? For self-discovery. So there are lots of different ways we can come to this. But most parents today need guidance. Because this is not stuff that our foreparents had access to. We now have this knowledge that we can share in multiple different platforms. And I think that that's the fastest and the easiest way to do it.
So there's something you said around tracking and observing that I really wanted to highlight. Yeah. And this is, one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about mindfulness is this idea of training our internal observer, right? Training our attention muscle to look to the environment, to look at what's happening with their body, to look to other and try to understand the meaning of what's happening here. Can we look beyond the surface, right? So when we see a child behaving a certain way, do we have the capacity to observe that behavior as signaling something to us about what that child needs or is feeling that they may not be able to communicate to us, right? And so much co-regulation and attunement and healing can come when we as the adults can separate the behavior from anything that has to do with us, right? There's a lot of conditioning, for example, around what is proper behavior, right? Or improper behavior. So we might see, children being children. They can't sit still, you know what I mean? And instead of judging the behavior so much, can we witness it with this lens of tracking and observing?
Well, that's, in the therapeutic process, when I'm working with a family, I'm having parents record what they're observing in the home, and I'm having them create journal entries. And so when they come back into the counseling, I say, so what did you observe? What did you see? So I'm teaching parents how to not just label, but how to understand their material that they are seeing, so that they can code it for themselves. And we have to also recognize that I'm not trying to make every parent a therapist for their child or anything like that, but there's so many distractions in modern life that we have lost the ability for us to even listen instinctively and at an attuned level to our environment, to our children. We are losing the capacity to even understand what our eyes are seeing. And so why I am talking about reading and studying and consulting experts is because even our adults need to retrain ourselves to get back to a place of a more natural way of living, that helps our instincts. We've gotten away from the body and the mind and the spirit.
Oh, I so agree with what you're saying. And it is really empowering, I think, to realize that our natural state of being is one of love and connection, right? One of being able to tune into the instincts, what the body's communicating to us, right? So if I'm sitting with you and you're dysregulated, I can feel that.
You're supposed to be able
to.
Yeah.
And if I'm aware of what my body's communicating to me, I can notice that there's this sense of tension maybe, right? Or my eyes are darting away, right? And when we can really start to notice these subtle signals, it really allows us to be more aware of what's happening within ourselves and to really tune into how can we be more regulated when we show up in other relationships, And so I think about heart coherence a lot, right? So the heart is the largest source of electromagnetic energy, 100 times stronger than the brain, right? Heart math is discovered. And we are constantly tuning into each other's heart fields, which is why we can feel the vibration all the time, right? So we say, oh, this person's good vibes, and that's bad vibes. We can feel the vibes. And we can train our awareness to tune into that more. So that...
Yeah, but if you're very distracted, you lose that sense of awareness. If you have drugs and alcohol on board, that's going to be damaged.
Because you're numbing your sensations, you're numbing your feeling, your experience.
You're numbing all the connections, So, and if you do it repeatedly over time, you lose it. You got to know that the human body works on reinforced structures. What you train it is what will come out. And if you don't feed that, you will lose it, And so for me, I know we're not talking about drugs and alcohol today, but for me, there is so much of substance use and even medications that alter the mind that we are damaging our own body's ability to do this kind of work. There are people who go into therapy and they come out and say the therapy didn't work. I'm like, what do you mean the therapy didn't work? This person is doing the same thing for everybody, and the people who went in before you, it worked. How come it didn't work for you? What is the state that you went into it? What's the state of dysregulation that you went into the process? Did you get to a place where you could so that you could hear, you could see, you could feel? And so it goes right back to what we were saying a little earlier. This state of readiness to parent is equally the same state of readiness to communicate with other people. Readiness for growth, it means I have to take time. I have to step back from the distractions.
Yes.
Center.
So there is so much power in embodied presence, right? Can we tune into what's happening here now in my internal experience? What are the sensations I'm noticing, right? What are the feelings arising in the heart space? Can I witness if my mind is racing or if there's space between my thoughts? Can I witness if these thoughts are negative or self-loving? And to your point, this is something we can train.
And we want to put it into our teenagers. I've been talking a lot about younger children, but this is critical for children 16 to 25. this is the work that we want them to have. We want to make sure that they are now, because they're separating and individuating away from the home, away from the adults, and we now change from being parenting, the discipline, to now guiding as guidance, providing guidance to our older children. And this is the material of the guidance. How do we train young adults, late adolescents, young adults, to now be their own master of regulating their systems, boundary settings, so they can know how to be healthy in relationships with others, privileging themselves so that they know that they have value, right? This now becomes the last phase of parenting that we bring into all of this stuff that we so from attachment, the attachment work, to the modeling work, now to the guidance work. And hopefully, by the time we let them go at 21, 25, whatever years you're letting them go at, you then just simply become the support and mentor for the rest of their life. Mm-hmm. And that's the cycle, if you will, of life.
Yeah, and it's why I feel that it's so important that we have more openness and more models that encourage even micro moments of mindfulness, right? Yeah. Where we're training this resilience and awareness, right? So we're inviting teenagers and even younger children who, the younger children are naturally present, right? Yeah. But we train them to stay at least in that presence, to notice within that presence, and certainly for teens to encourage moments of that, especially in today's age where there's so much external distraction, which creates comparison and competition, and takes them out of their own being, right? Yes. The mindfulness work is so important because it's really training the attention to focus on what's happening here now within me. And what does that information tell me about me, right? What do these difficult feelings tell me about me, right? And can I accept them as information, right? What is this difficult challenge or lesson teaching me, And I think,
and so so that the teenager, the late adolescent, the young adult who is doing that work need not be afraid that they're going to fail something, because if they're securely attached, they know that it doesn't matter if they get it right, they get it wrong, they still have value and they still belong. The child who is anxious, avoidant, or ambivalent might be afraid to do that work because they're afraid of failure.
Yes.
So it's all ties back to attachment. And we want, and that reparative work for these older children, I want them to do that mindfulness work. I want them to be safe enough to go into those spaces of vulnerability, to listen to the body and do that work. But it still comes back to their ability to do that is still hinged on what came before.
Right. So
it might not be that easy. So they too might need to look at a model to be able to do that work. I see a lot of young adults who they're so natural with the mindfulness, and there are others who fight it because they can't get to that place of safety on them inside themselves, so they have to do the work with somebody else.
Mm-hmm. Okay, right? So so we know from research that what's critical to resilience is this healthy attachment with a loving caregiver, right? Especially upon birth, infancy, and in the early childhood development years. And we know that resilience is really a skill that can be a process over time, right? It's something that we can develop and train.
Yes.
And so for those parents or adults that did not necessarily receive that healthy attachment, what would you say to them in terms of their ability to heal or repair that in adulthood? Can we build resilience, for example, in adulthood, well past adolescence?
Yeah, the answer is yes. But the truth is, even when we do the repairing or the reparative work, even though when we engage in resilience, it's not a cure. I really need to say that. It's not a cure. It won't be like you never had that early childhood experience. It'll never be like, so for somebody who is anxious, avoidant, or ambivalent in their attachment style, who comes into adulthood, who might have issues with boundaries, being in relationships, control issues, all of that, you can do the work and you can learn to manage it. You can learn new skills. But you won't ever have the luxury of not ever having that on your shoulder. So the trauma doesn't go away. What happened in early childhood doesn't just simply disappear like magic. But think of it almost like a computer. You can store it in a memory file that's so far away. Computers talk about what's archived and what's current. Store it in archival places in the brain and use new information to rule your life. But you have to do that very consciously. You have to be very mindful about it. Because when you relax on that, the old stuff can seep back because it's still there. So for me...
There's so much truth to this.
Yeah, so for me, people will say, I did the therapy, why am I still struggling with this? And I say, ease up on yourself. The this that's back in the archival stuff, yes, it's still there, but you don't need to give it power or weight because for today, you have new skills to use. You have new tools to manage your life, right? We own, it's there, but it's not who I am today, and you move on.
Yeah, I love that you use the computer example because this is something that I often speak to too. Is that it's almost like in childhood that becomes the operating system, right? And so our automatic nervous system response is really something that's learned in childhood.
Yes.
And so to your point, it's not that it necessarily goes away, but we can almost have these software upgrades, right?
I love it, software upgrades,
where we start to become more self-aware and mindful as to our automated responses.
Yes.
And to decipher, does this response make sense in this space, in this setting, with this person?
Yeah.
Or is this a mismatch? Am I perceiving danger where in fact there is safety? Or am I perceiving safety when there's in fact danger?
Yeah.
Right?
I can give you a funny example. I like music, all right?
Me too.
And I've done choirs, been a choir director for a long time, singing, all of that, right? Every time I get up for a proposal, I am awash in anxiety, fear, and dread. Nobody who knows me would say, people say, you? No way. I grew up as a fearful child. My attachment is very fearful, very people-pleasing kind of thing. But in my adult, once I learned that was what was happening to me, I learned new ways to manage fear and anxiety. So I feel the fear, but I do what I do anyway.
And this is the power of allowing and noticing the feeling. Because one of the biggest things I feel we need to change dialogue and even our systems around is welcoming feeling, right? We talk so much about what are we thinking, and can we learn more information? But so much of the wisdom comes from what are we feeling?
But we still have the boundary feelings because feelings are not facts.
They're temporary as well.
They are not just temporary. They're very subjective.
Right.
They're not facts, and so I teach people not to use emotional reasoning to make decisions because feelings are not facts. I can say today, you can mash me on my toe, but based on how our relationship and how I feel about you, I say, oh, not a big deal. Don't even think about it. It doesn't bring up any anxiety. I'm not angry. We're cool. But let somebody else who I don't know mash me the exact same way. I'm ready to fisticuffs to fight. Right? And so our feelings, very subjective, based on the nature. All of it is controllable.
Yeah.
But I have to have the skills to manage that. And so regardless of what feelings track from childhood into adulthood, once I do the work in adulthood, I now have capacities, assets, skills to manage to regulate, to retrain, to do the work. And that's how we get to resilience.
Yeah. When I think of feelings, I think one of the things that is so interesting to me is the way in which our emotions color our perception of what we're experiencing.
Definitely.
Exactly like the example you just gave there, right? If I'm feeling courage, for example, in a situation, I'm heart coherent, I'm regulated, I have my mindful brain online, and I can respond effectively. If I'm feeling fear in that exact same situation, well, now I'm incoherent, I don't have my mindful brain online, and I'm in survival response, right? And so, and of course, when we're in that fear-based or negative emotional state, we're perceiving threat, whether it exists or not, right? And so we're wired for protection.
Yes.
And I think that's the piece when it comes to emotional awareness that is so critical for me is, can we notice what we're feeling? Because there has been this dialogue, and I want to say that this is across the board, but I feel it especially for the males in our society. You know, and I'm a mother of boys. This, you know, being vulnerable is weakness, right? You have to be a superhero, right? You're not to feel as if this isn't an integral part of who we are. We're meant to feel, right? Our first development of systems is our sensation and motory system, right? Our first language is movement and sensation.
Yes, it is.
And that really ought to say so much to us about the value of this system and its communication to us about what's happening within us. And, you know, we're speaking so much to the ability to train resilience and how with mindfulness we can train that awareness of what's happening. What am I feeling? You know, because some of the feelings are not obvious, right?
No.
They're really kind of buried
Subtle.
under
Yeah.
the
And I like
surface.
the fact that you brought in about how we attempt to give a different narrative to our male children versus our female children. And I think we do just such a disservice to what should be natural to all children. All children need to cry. All children need to experience all emotions.
Yes.
All children need to be taught how to do it the same.
Exactly.
But culture, you know, and that's something we haven't talked about. How does culture overlay on top of attachment? How does culture sit on top of parenting? And these are the kinds of things that can bring in information that can be damaging to us. You know, these cultural stereotypes, these cultural messages sometimes are not always helpful. You know, what is a boy? What is a girl? What's a man? What's a woman? You know, cultural stuff. And we can use that to override our natural humanity, our natural humanness, not humanity, our natural humanness. And so we have to be, my husband was very good with it. We have daughters. And my husband used to always say to the girls, you are as strong as you want to be. Has nothing to do with your gender.
Yes.
Throw that ball, climb that fence, ride that thing, you know, because you're a girl is irrelevant to anything you want to do.
Yes.
And because you're a girl, you don't have to cry. You could think. You know, so we now have 2 daughters. They are, it's like, you know, they're both feminine, gentle, and all of that. But I'm telling you, they're beasts in the business world. Yeah. You know, they have both because we defied the cultural narrative.
Well, you know, in Eastern traditions, there's a lot of emphasis on the fact that each of us has masculine and feminine energy, right? And it's really about finding that balance and union of these polarities within.
It's about balance and union. I like those words.
Yeah, and so, yes, as women, you know, we have certain feminine aspects, you know, like feminine energy is associated with fluidity, our ability to go with the flow, our spirituality, our creativity, our sensuality, our softness, our nurturing. You know, and the masculine is action-oriented, structure, order, you know, strength.
Yes.
Container, right?
However, even in the masculine, there is nurturance.
Exactly.
There is holding.
Yes.
There is in our masculinity. I had to come in on that because I fear sometimes that masculine is still defined as devoid of feeling.
Yes, I agree with you.
But in all of this, this order and this governance and this creator that masculinity tends to be ascribed to, there is also this softness, this gentleness, this caring, this kindness, this compassion that this masculinity has, and we need to bring it up so that it balances out.
Well, that's the masculine in its power, right?
Yes.
Is when it can be strong and action-oriented, but receptive and wise and
I like
soft,
receptive and wise.
right?
Yeah.
It's that balance of really the masculine and the feminine, and how when we come together in those strengths within self, but also in union, between the feminine and the masculine, we are so much stronger, right? And yet, really cultivating a norm in our language and in our dialogue around the need to allow what we feel to be felt, to be expressed, and specifically to do this with our boys.
Yes.
When my sons cry, I let them know that it's healthy actually, because you are releasing that energy. And we distinguish, of course, between crying to get what you want, right?
Oh, yeah.
And crying because you're feeling sadness, right? Or frustration. And finding the balance of just understanding that it's okay to feel, and it's okay to allow that feeling to move through you. In the energy world, we talk a lot about emotions being like the element of water. And it's meant to take the path of least resistance, right? And if we think of water, it flows around the obstructions, right? It doesn't force itself to come up against something, it just goes around. And our feelings are like this, if we have the capacity, of course, which we will have more of if we received healthy attachment, where we were recognized in our feeling states, as being whole and held in those feeling states, then we can have the capacity to look at our feelings and say, okay, what is this feeling teaching me right now, right? And so instead of resisting anger or grief or sadness or frustration or insecurity, self-doubt, if we could instead say, okay, I'm feeling this, I'm going to welcome it so that I may learn from it, right? Yeah. It's just information, because when we don't acknowledge that we feel it, it's like that rock turns into this huge boulder, and then the water becomes this like dam of pressure. And what happens, it will explode. And that's where these emotions, these suppressed emotions, become manifested in physical disease or an inability to connect with another. We're in this state of dysregulation because we are not finding this non-judgmental acceptance of what is moving through us. This distinction of, I don't need to identify with my feelings, like you were saying, that they're subjective, right? It's, I'm not what I feel.
I'm not what I feel.
But I do feel, and what I feel is relevant to teach me something about me. Yeah. It can be really...
It's lovely.
Yeah, it's so powerful, right? And so there's so much we can do to help children embrace what they feel and to be mindful as to what they're feeling. Where are they feeling it in their bodies? What's that signaling to them, right? Because when I think about how do I know if something's in alignment for me? Well, my body will tell me, right? If I'm sitting with you and I feel relaxed and I'm smiling and I'm engaged in eye contact and I'm just so passionate about this conversation, my body is communicating to me that I feel safe and connected here. Right? This feels in alignment. And then you enter a different environment and all of a sudden you notice you're tensing, right? And you're darting, looking around, you don't feel safe to make eye contact. Well, that says something about whether that's in alignment too. So I think this ability to reconnect, as you say, to the wisdom of our instincts and our body and to the earth as well, which I feel is such a reflection of how connected we are to our hearts or not, it's so important for us to ultimately understand what are we receiving in terms of communication as to, is this in alignment or is this not? Because if we can't distinguish that, how do we thrive?
How do we thrive? Yeah.
Right?
It's beautiful. Nice way of explaining it.
I mean, there's so much wisdom in the body, and I like you, I really feel like we've lost the sense of what is so innate, right? Like divine design, right? There's a reason why the first thing that develops is like sensation and motory, right? We are meant to be in movement. In fact, when we're still, there's still movement happening in aliveness, right? The heart is beating, the breath is flowing. And so our ability to tune into this movement, this sensation, this feeling is really just information. And the more that we become able to witness it, I think the more we can tune into the subtle information that exists in the field, right? So we know, for example, that communication is so much more than the words we say, right? It's your body language, it's the mannerisms, it's the tone, right? And when we understand these things, we can start to tune into the meaning beneath the surface, right? Like, you know, this child is really upset, screaming, you know, and obviously dysregulated. What has happened in the environment? What happened before that situation? What is that body language, that expression communicating to me, you know, of that child's needs? How can I tune to that, right? Yeah.
It's all connected, you know. It's all connected, you know. From birth, even into our old age, you know, we're always fine-tuning that receptive system within us, you know, and calling for that balance. And again, how healthy we are, and it's not just how healthy we are in terms of psychological or physical, but we also have to look at, you know, if we have any other medical conditions, any other diseases in the body, can also take away from that and our ability to connect to all of that life source that you're talking about, you know. If people have major health issues as they age up, if a child is struggling with cancer or a child is struggling, or, you know, all of it, it all comes, there is no pat answer per se, you know. Unfortunately, the human system, from the time we're born, is already starting to decline, you know, once we get through childhood. So the health, we have to pay just as much health to the mind as we also pay to the body. So our children need to be well nourished, we need to be well hydrated, we need to be well rested for all of this work that you're talking about, you know. Sunlight, we need the sunlight, we need to be in the air, we need to recreate, we need to have play, we need to laugh, so that we get all of that dopamine response into the body. So that, you know, at the end of what we've been talking about is that this is a lot of work, whether it's for the parent or the child, but the vessel also needs, the body needs to be attended to so that the work can be done and the work can be centered.
Love what you just shared so much, especially around play and connection to nature. Because something that I really witness, particularly in the women's work I do, is the power of being able to offer space to women where they have the opportunity to receive and to reconnect just with being. You know, not all this responsibility that they're carrying and this focus always on everyone else, but for them to actually receive nurturing themselves and to reconnect to just being, to consciously connecting with nature, to even take these moments of gratitude to say, wow, like I'm alive, you know, and I'm grateful for this air I'm breathing, for the soil that nourishes me, for the waters that sustain me. What that does to just bring us into a space of centeredness and heart coherence, and then that filling of our own cups to be in those spaces of presence, whether it's just conscious connection with nature, you know, simple gratitude exercises, just noticing the beauty that surrounds us every day, you know, that we become so disconnected or distracted from when we're in the space of yesterday, kind of rehashing what happened in the past, or worrying about tomorrow, when all we have is right here, right now. you know, and that's the natural state of being, you know. It's really powerful for me to witness then the quality of service that we can then give to another when we allow ourselves those spaces, you know. And I think what's interesting when we talk about the nervous system, right, is that what we repeat, we program, right? Yeah. So if we have been chronically stressed, as so many of us are, because we're juggling parenthood, we're juggling trying to create a stable and secure future for ourselves and our families, right? We're juggling all of the demands now that exists on our children, you know, the amount of extracurricular activities, the amount of homework that they've got. Yeah. We become programmed to be overdoing, you know, this is the programming of our times. You know, we can be reached every minute and second now because of these phones. So we no longer have these times with which we start work and finish work anymore, right? There's this constant expectation for like instant gratification, instant response. And that's such a huge reason why we've lost this sort of connectedness with just the stillness, the being, the allowing, the presence. And I've certainly come to learn in my own journey of healing that there's so much power in the allowance of just being, you know?
It has to be deliberate and conscious today.
Yeah.
Doing that balance, you know, and it's a choice.
It is a choice, yeah.
It's a choice.
And that's something I really witness, is that it's very hard for us to come into a space of quieting the mind, right? And really being present when we've programmed ourselves to be chronically thinking, spinning, doing, you know? And I always offer that to people when they come to one of my meditations or my breathwork sessions or yoga, that expect your mind to be running. We've trained this, right? But just witness it, because it's the witnessing with loving curiosity, you know, non-judgment, that reveals to us, wow, I'm having a really hard time just being present. I'm having a hard time quieting my mind, you know? What is that saying to me about the ways in which I can tend to my own nervous system? I can love myself more deeply, you know? And creating more opportunities and spaces for people to experience these moments, these micro moments of presence, stillness, connecting to the senses, right? Valuing our internal experience, you know, in balance with this external experience. And so, one last question. You know, we spoke about healthy attachment, right? And the importance of establishing healthy attachment in terms of building resilience in our children, helping them to understand how to self-regulate ultimately. What does that require from a parent? You know, there's this saying or research I heard that you must attune 30% of the time. And I don't know if this is, you know, true, or how do we even decipher what 30% of the time is. But what are your tips then to a parent in terms of how can I offer that healthy attachment to the child? What do I need to be aware of within myself, and how do I show up now?
I think probably going back to that finding of the balance, that you need a healthy self first, okay? You need a self that is unrushed, okay? So when you know that you're going to be with children, how do you exhale some of the stuff away so that you can be present? First thing, present. Are my ears actually listening? So that's one thing. Another thing is, depending on the age of child, you need to also have eyes on children. Have you created a life for you and your children where you can see them? Okay, so you have to have, you know, when I'm thinking particularly 0 to 5. Somebody should always have eyes on 0 to 5. Children 0 to 5. Who is watching? So are you available for that kind of activity? Or are children at home by themselves without supervision? Or is a 10-year-old minding a 3-year-old? you don't have eyes on. That's a very dangerous thing. So one tip is make sure somebody has eyes on for safety. We live in a world where whether it's kidnapping or abuses by a caregiver, quality of eyes on, okay? Then I also want parents to be able to have designated time to listen to, so what happened to you today? What did you experience today? And it doesn't matter whether the kid is homeschooled, at home, or at school, or at somebody's house. We have about 20 minutes of each day where we sit down without anything and we talk about, so what happened to you? What did you feel today? What went through your mind today, right? So that's set time for the dialogue. And we don't do it group process. We do it for each child. If you have 10 children, well, that's your business, right? But you have to have that time for each child. Okay?
One-on-one.
The one-on-one availability. I also think that we have to have simple play, all right? Now, some people, when I say have time for play or time for vacation, people tend to think that I'm talking, oh my, we got to plan a trip. No. I said playtime could be simply sitting on the step out back, throwing a ball, or playing a card game, a board game, or if we do electronics in the house, the parents are doing the electronic game as opposed to the child gaming by themselves. The child is gaming with a parent. Or we out back, running around in the sun together. And if you have arthritis and you can't run around with your kid, find an activity that's fun for both of you that you could do together. Okay, if you live in the Caribbean, it's a little bit of a beach. You know, you don't have to turn it into a picnic. It's just a blanket, and we're at the beach, and that 20 minutes. It doesn't need to be all day. You know, sometimes I say to parents, "Do play," and they say, "Well, I don't have time." I say, "I'm talking about 20 minutes, half an hour, 40 minutes, a couple of times a week, where you're just doing laughter." Because another tip is that we have to have fun time, because one of the problems is that we are not bringing on the dopamine in the brain that comes from laughter. You know, when life was a little simpler, people used to sit out on the verandas, shout to the neighbors, and you could hear the laughter, you could hear the noise, you could hear the exhaling happening communally, and that brings a particular chemical reaction into the body. So now that we don't do that, we have to recreate it in our free time. So play and laugh together. You know, and if your time is so strapped, then we're watching a TV show together. You know, whatever that little TV show is together. And you and the kid sitting on the floor watching, I don't know what kids are watching. In my days, it was My Little Ponies and something like that, right? Or Sesame Street. But at least you spend time to say to the child, I like what you do for fun, and I'm going to do it with you. Again, it sends a message of valuing, right?
Yeah.
And then so we talk about set time, we talk about playtime, shared family time, time for listening. And then the other tip for the parent is discipline. Know if you're co-parenting, spend time with your co-parent, talking about what are the techniques that we're going to use to discipline or for disciplining or punishment in our family. So that, again, parents come to the table as a unified front and not from two different directions. Because if both parents are not on agreement, we have splitting. And if you present a split model to a child, they are going to test it and manipulate it, which is going to just create chaos and drama in the family. So parents need to actually co-parenting, whether, you know, even if you're divorced, separated, or whatever, if there is a co-parent, we still need to have a conversation about what are we going to do, what are the consistent messages that we're going to send to the child, so we talk as one voice. Okay.
Yes.
So that's another strategy for parents. Custodial parents who don't live at home, who might have a child for a weekend. So the child goes to this person's house for a few days, and this person, or the child is going to so-and-so for the holidays, and then they come back because we have different custodial parents. Again, each family should know what the rules are in the other house, so that we don't sort of set kids up to be fighting, you know, over the privileges or feeling that they don't have the same privileges. If you have stepchildren, for example, it's very easy for stepchildren to feel a little uncomfortable when they're biological children in the home. So ensuring that parents create an atmosphere that all children are equal in the family system, right? So again, the messaging, the communication between parents is very important as well. And finally, if we are bringing in kin as parents, so the biological parents are absent, so it's kin that are raising the children. We want those parents to also ensure that they're not sending messages to the child to say that the reason why I am parenting you is not because your parents didn't like you, but that I was the best for you. I'm thinking specifically of a child that I worked with whose parents kept one of the biological children, but this child had to be sent somewhere else. Right? And so that child who went to live with their grandparents felt that there was something wrong with them why they didn't get to stay with the parents. So regardless of how the system is created, the adults need to talk to each other so the child does not feel the dissonance in where they're located. Okay, so that's another something for parents to be thinking about. So those are my big ones.
Thank you. Those are great tips. I received a lot around consistency.
Yes.
In message and in cohesiveness amongst the various members that will play a role in the child. And presence as the message, I think, is really powerful, right? So whether it's set time to listen, play time, that this is all coming back to our presence, our undivided attention, so that we're really with the child. And I love what you spoke to around play, because I feel that I witness a lot in adults that we've lost this ability and this sense of play. We become so serious about our responsibilities and our obligations that we've almost lost our sense of play. And you think about adults playing, it tends to be partying, right? And almost involving substance use. Yeah. As opposed to
just natural play.
Natural play, right? Like exploring the world through the wonder and eyes of a child.
And it doesn't have to be conscripted. I mean, when I say play, I'm talking about a walk.
Yeah.
Just walk around the block, walk down the street together. That's play. Yeah. And it doesn't have to be structured play where let's go for a walk and then we have to have the big conversation while we're walking. I mean, it should be free of all of these things. It should just be, we're just walking and we're chatting about all kinds of things and we're laughing. We got to also put the humor into the play so that it does a different work in the body.
It's really important what you said there around, it doesn't have to be this like structured thing. There is the beauty in the flow of naturalness, right? And we can only be in flow state, of course, if we're regulated, right? And we're heart coherent. But then things arise spontaneously, divinely, right? We're in that walk, and all of a sudden now, because there's this connection, this presence, we're amongst nature, the child opens about something, right? Yes. And so it's really about always coming back to this presence with self, this centeredness, this heart coherence, so that we can allow what wants to arise naturally to arise. I really like that narrowing in that we don't have to have these like overly structured ideas around play and time, that there's so much that can just arise in simply being present with self and then with them. Yeah. Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Martin, for your time.
It's my pleasure.
It's been so wonderful to speak with you and just to receive your wisdom and your passion for the work you do. And I'm sure that our audience will really benefit from this discussion.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. I love this topic. I'm very passionate about it because if we're going to heal our society and our communities, we have to do it through our families.
Yes.
The future is dependent on the structures that we put in place, and those will not happen without our families. And so family health and well-being is very important. But to have healthy families, you must have healthy parents.
and healthy self, right?
Yeah,
Like
comes
it
all the way back.
begins with self, right?
It all comes, and you know, you also you reflect for a moment that collectivistic kinds of societies do a much better job sometimes on all of these things that we're talking about, because they've got multiple eyes on multiple ways of nurturing and holding it together without one person feeling overburdened.
Yeah.
You know, individualistic kinds of cultures, we have really pulled this thing apart so that people are thinking they have to be the perfect one. And we got to get away from that. And so I thank you very much for allowing me to have this conversation with you. It's been a privilege.
Oh, thank you. I love what you just shared there too, because it goes back to what we originally discussed around let's honor the uniqueness, the essence of each individual within the understanding of our interconnectedness, right?
Yeah.
So like one of our goals really is recognizing we must build resilience from the inside out. The self-awareness, self-acceptance is so important, but that can only exist in systems and models that support that, right? Whether it's the family structure, the education system, social systems, policies, they all play a role,
Yes, they
right? And we have to recognize both. Because we can't leave it all up to the individual if we don't create the support systems to recognize that.
Can't happen.
It can't happen, right? So it's really, I think, empowering to recognize, we're all uniquely individual, and our gifts come from our uniqueness, but they play a role in this collective.
We're born to be in community.
Connection,
We're born to be in community.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Same.
Such
Thank you
a
very
pleasure.
much.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.